This is the new Atari 2600 Plus, which is a recreation of the old Atari 2600, formerly known as the video computer system, but not to be confused with the new version of the video computer system that's a modern console. In this case, this is a recreation of the old video computer system 2600. So there are a few things that I would like to check out about the Atari 2600 Plus. Firstly, I would like to compare it against an original Atari 2600, specifically the 4-switch model, to keep it apples to apples. Secondly, I would like to check out the peripherals it comes with. So there's a joystick, and I've also bought the paddle controllers. And I'd like to compare those to the originals as well. Thirdly, I'd like to check compatibility with original cartridges, such as this one, which it's supposed to be compatible with most of them. There's actually a pretty expansive compatibility chart online, and it's quite expansive. It even lists titles such as Custer's Revenge, which you would not even expect it to acknowledge. Lastly, I'd like to see how this thing works. So I'm going to actually open it up and take a look inside, and I'm going to look at the insides of the controllers, both the joystick and the paddles. And with the controllers, I'm going to compare them to the originals as well as the Flashback controllers for the joystick, and I have a reason for that. So I guess before I get to any of that, I have to unbox it. So here we are, unboxing the Atari 2600 Plus. Now there's a little bit of tape here. Let me slice that open, and we will see what's inside. And there it is. That looks pretty nice. It's very small compared to the original, but we'll get to that. One thing is this is the whole unit. This is not good in camera. There are no wires hanging off of here, but again, we'll get to that. Yeah, overall, that looks nice. What else do we get in here? We have a quick start guide. That looks really cool with the little Atari there. And a box. Let me go move that out of the way. Gotta figure out how to open the box. There is our controller, which looks pretty nice as well. Got the original style plug, and what else is in here? I expect there's going to be a power supply and a cable in here. Oh no, there's not. Okay, I'll find that. We have this cartridge, so there is no dust cover on the bottom. We'll compare the cartridges too. Got little dip switches here, so that's how you select which game you want to play. I think there's another box in here. Yep. So I assume this will contain the cables. Sure enough, there's an HDMI cable. Nothing very exciting. And a USB-C cable, I think. Does this come with a power supply? I hope so. No, the rest of this box is empty. So if you're going to buy this, make sure you buy a power supply for it. Let me see what the power rating is. Does it say on here? Yes, 5 volts, 1 amp. So I should be able to find something for that. Let me move these out of the way. We can begin our comparison phase of things. Actually, before I get to that, we should do an unboxing of a second controller. Now, I noticed it's taped at the top, but if you don't want to break the seal, they didn't tape the bottom, so whatever. it's the same as the other one. There's nothing else in the box. That's simple. And then we have, this is the paddle controllers, as well as there's another cartridge in here. Same thing. Open it from the bottom if you want. There's your paddle controller. It looks about right. And I assume below this is probably the cartridge. Yep. I mean, I'm pretty sure you're intended to open this from the top, but you know, they could have taped the bottom too if they wanted. So there's another cartridge. Interesting that they have this opposite of this. Do they do that on the other? Sorry. Yep. Interesting. So 2 cartridges. And now I can begin the comparison. So the first thing I notice between these two is the size. The 2600 Plus is a lot smaller than the original 2600. It's actually a bit closer, but still even smaller than the new VCS. The second most obvious difference you can see between my 2600 Plus and this particular Atari 2600 is the wood grain and the orange border. Now, classically, you would expect the Atari 2600 to have the wood grain, and there was a 4-switch model in that color palette. However, I don't actually own one, but I do own a 6-switch model in that color palette, so I'm going to briefly swap in one of those to compare the colors. And you can see here, it's pretty decent. I think this border is a little bit thicker than on the original, and the wood grain's a little bit different, but I don't think most people are going to notice that. So in general, I think that's pretty good. Now, because there are some fundamental differences between the 6-switch and the 4-switch, I'm going to bring the 4-switch back in for the remainder of these comparisons. As you can see, there are 4 switches along the top of both of these systems with a cartridge port in the middle of them. On the old 2600, you can see there are these spaces here where you probably could fit another set of switches, and that's because the 4-switch model uses modified molds from the 6-switch model. So it's the same size, they've just blocked off those holes, and you'll see a couple of other molding marks where they've modified the mold. Whereas the 2600 Plus is brand new, and it doesn't really have space due to its diminutive size for these extra switches. And honestly, I think this looks cleaner. The cartridge port is going to proportionally take up more space on this than it does here, obviously due to, again, its diminutive size and the fact that the cartridges are the same size. Now, the switches themselves are the same. Power, TV type, game select, game reset. Same on here, power, TV type, game select, game reset. These two should be just regular on-off switches, and they are, or at least these, yeah. And they are, just like here. However, you'll notice that on this one they're a lot clickier. Now, I don't know if that's purely due to this being worn, but I don't believe so. These two should be momentary, and they are also stiffer than on the original. I flip these over, we can take a look at the back. So on the original 4-switch model, they put the labeling up here on the top, and it's kind of hard to read. On the new 2600 Plus, they've actually moved the labeling down here, which is also hard to read, but it gives her a cleaner look at the top. And this is actually a bit more consistent with the original 6-switch model. So if you look here, the labeling was on the back. You can also see an interesting difference here on the 6-switch. The power and controllers are here, whereas on the 4-switch, they move power and controllers to here. You will also note that this area down here has a weird molding mark on the 4-switch because, again, they just modified the molds. So as you can see, the controller ports are in the same places on both of these, as well as the difficulty switches. You can see they are in the same place as the original. These are a little bit bigger, which makes sense because the console's a little bit bigger. And a little bit stiffer on here, but not too much more, honestly. And then there's this third switch here that you can see exists on both of these consoles. Now this is actually quite interesting. So on the old system, our video output is through this cord, and it is a modulated video output. So basically, it acts the same as an antenna plugging into your television. And what this switch does is it determines whether you want your Atari to essentially broadcast on channel 2 or channel 3. Now, on the Atari 2600 Plus, you can see we use HDMI instead. And that doesn't work the same way. So you might wonder, what's the switch for then if you don't have channel 2 and 3? Well, in this case, this changes your aspect ratio between 4:3, which would be the original aspect ratio, or 16:9, which is what most televisions today use. So I think that's a very clever use and a very clever positioning to keep it in the same spot. So that brings me to the first difference around back here, which is the video output. Here we have a cord sticking out the back, which is a bit inconvenient. On the new system, they've opted for a removable connector, which I really like, but they've put it in the center here, which is where power would be on the old system. So instead they've moved power to being over here, which over here there's just nothing, and they don't have anything running out the bottom. If they wanted to be like super original, they could have put the power port here, run an HDMI cord out, but I think this is a better solution. So I think that this is a good balance between usefulness, convenience, and still keeping a pretty original layout, actually. So I don't have much more to talk about on the consoles, so let's go move these out of the way and start to compare peripherals. On the left is the CX40 Plus joystick that comes with the Atari 2600 Plus. On the right is the regular CX40 joystick that came with almost all Atari 2600s back in the day. Now, an exception to that would be the CX10 joystick that came with the very early Ataris, but was discontinued pretty quickly. And then later on, we had the Flashback Controller that came with the Atari Flashback series. And while all of those controllers are intercompatible with each other, we also have the Atari VCS joystick for the new Atari VCS, which is not compatible with any of those. Overall, these two controllers look very similar. I noted that the size is identical, which is nice because the Flashback controller is actually slightly smaller. The finish does look a little bit different, although there were some differences in finish. As well, there might be some differences in color on the original CX40s, but there's definitely a difference in color here. Not that big a deal. As far as cosmetic differences, I think the most notable one would be the slight difference in this shape versus this shape, and frankly, that is a nitpick. So overall, I think they've done a good job on this. Now, as far as feel, this does not feel particularly good, and even brand new, they don't feel amazing, though pretty much all of them are worn out. The travel is very minimal. This button should have a slight tactile feel, but mine doesn't. On the new controller, this has a lot more travel, but there's also absolutely no tactility on any of the directions. The button, however, does have about the tactility you would hope for. So from the top, they're pretty similar. The feel's significantly different, I'll say, but not in a bad way necessarily. On the bottom, you will notice a distinct difference. They did put the pads in the same places, which is cool. However, you'll notice that, well, there's screw holes on the CX40. There aren't any on the CX40 Plus, because this came out in 2023 when you're not allowed to repair your devices, so they've likely hidden them under the feet. So we'll find out later if that is indeed the case. I hope so. Otherwise, you have this label here with information that does not exist here, and this molding mark, which is actually, I believe, to hold the internals for this up. I would guess that this is built more like the Flashback controller internally, but we will see. Lastly, we have the paddle controllers. As you might be able to tell by the fact that this is a little bit messed up, these are the original paddles. These are the Flashback paddles that come with a little bit of fuzz, so that's nice. Overall, these look pretty nice. They've got the shiny foil sticker, which looks pretty much the same. It does look a little bit darker than the original, but who knows if that's faded. The feel, these feel a little bit looser, but I actually prefer the feel of this. Also, these might just be looser because they're old. Button feel, absolutely no tactility, but yeah, that's the same on both of them. So I think these are very good. On the back, they do actually show the screws, so that's nice. And then you have the information here. On the back of the originals, you have the 2 screws, no information. The screws are a little bit deeper set here, but who cares? Honestly, I expect the internal of this, will probably be the same as the internal of this. I think this is slightly heavier, but not by much. Yeah, there's not really much you can do to cheapen or modernize these controllers, so I'm going to guess the internals are pretty much the same, but we will see. Oh, real quick, I wanted to also compare the game cartridges themselves. So on the left, we have a 2600 plus game. On the right, we have an original 2600 game. From the front, the only thing I really notice is that the label is bigger on the new one versus the old one, which I don't think is a bad thing. The front label looks more or less the same. Yeah, I think the sizing is about the same on both of these. The main difference is actually on the bottom here. You can see that the original ones had this dust cover that the system would open up as you inserted it. The new ones do not. A lot of third-party ones also didn't have a dust cover. I don't think it was that big of a deal. For what it's worth, this still has these little prongs to open the dust cover on the old system, and the new system has the corresponding prongs to open up the old game cartridges, so that shouldn't cause any compatibility issues. So it was at this point in the video that I was planning on plugging this in, showing how it worked, and checking compatibility with original cartridges, as well as with the Harmony card, so before I started filming this video, I purposely avoided looking at anything else anyone said about the system. And now that I've learned some more about how it works, I really don't expect the Harmony card to work. However, nothing works on it. It freezes, and I've posted a video about that. Hopefully there will be a resolution, but in the meantime, I will move on to doing a teardown. Let's see what is inside this thing. But first, I would like to show what's inside of the 4-switch model. So I'm going to go switch to that real quick. And by 4-switch model, I meant the original 2600 4-switch, because obviously the 2600 Plus is also 4-switch. There are 4 screws in the bottom of this. I've already removed them. This one is a little bit different because I've modified it, but I will get to that. So we can pull this panel out. It's a little hard, and we will see this is what's inside of mine. So this is actually just a RetroTink, and that's not original. This board pulls a signal directly through the television interface adapter, as I mentioned earlier. So normally you would just have this one green board back here in the system at a slant. And normally you'd have this RF shielding on top of here. That sits right about there. That's what's inside an original 4-switch. The 6-switch model has 2 boards. One of them is in a big beefy metal can. I guess I could show that real quick. Okay, so this is a 6-switch model that I am working on putting the same mods on. So you can see the switches are out here, and then you have this board. Usually there's a bottom on here that's separate, and it connects via that ribbon cable. And this would sit flat in there, whereas this board is one board, sits at an angle. So obviously the 2600 Plus is not going to have a board that looks like this. However, I am expecting it to be a single board set at an angle just like this is. So we will see. Okay, so back to the 2600 Plus. If we flip it over, we will notice 4 exposed screws without those illegal warranty void stickers on them. So maybe they are actually right to repair friendly. I'm not sure. Either way, I would like to note that I already found out that this system doesn't work before I'm taking it apart. It has this sticker on the bottom that's reminiscent of the original, kind of. So I will begin by taking these 4 screws out, and I'll get back to you. Okay, with those 4 screws out, what will we find inside of this thing? It does open the same way as the original. Ooh, but this board comes with the top. The bottom has nothing in it. And there you can see what's in it. We have, it looks like a board here and a board here and a board here and a board here. So this is actually built more similarly to the original 6-switch model in that it's got multiple boards connected, but they are at an angle, as I suspected. This is weird. This is the LED that makes this glow. But look how they have it connected. That's really weird. I don't really know about that. It looks like this is a separate, sorry, it looks like this is a separate part from here. But yeah, I'm not gonna tear this down any further. I'm not really interested in looking at the details right now, but I wanted to see just generally how it was constructed, and we have our answer. So this is actually probably easier to put back together from that point than the other. Yeah, that's neat. Okay, so now I'm gonna look at what's inside the CX40 Plus joystick. But before I do so, I want to take a look at older joystick designs to see how they compare. First up is the CX10 joystick. This was not very common because it shipped with the early Ataris and then was very quickly replaced with the CX40 joystick. I've already removed the screws. What we will see is this is the top plate. We have these big springs. When you move the joystick, it moves that. This one I have lubricated. I don't know if that helps. We have a button with a spring as well. And this pushes down onto this assembly, which is usually actually screwed onto here. I will deal with that later. We have this plastic piece, which sits above the PCB. And on here, we just see these dome contacts held on with some kind of tape. And these just close the circuit and go to here. So that is what's inside the CX10. Next we have the CX40 joystick, which is by far the most common Atari joystick. There are some visual changes from the CX10. You can see that this says top up here, whereas this had an arrow. And they've gone from a yellow color to an orange color, which the system did as well. Some of these don't have any paint here. I suspect those came with the Darth Vader models, like my 4-switch is. So I've already taken the screws out of this one as well. We'll see. Oh, that was not graceful. This has this style joystick internally. And we still have the button. We don't have any springs here. And below that is the... Oh no, there's a spring for the fire button. Some have that, some don't. We have the PCB. I've replaced the plastic on this, so that's why it looks so bad. But we have the same dome contacts, and yeah, connects to the wires. It's a cost-reduced version of the CX10. Honestly, a bit more reliable from my understanding. Next up is the Atari Flashback Controller. The Flashback was a line similar to the 2600 Plus in that they were kind of a throwback, but they used an Atari on a chip. So basically they just put all the chips on one rather than emulation. So this is built a bit differently. So we can pull the top off and you'll notice this rubber membrane. So what happens is this pushes down on these little buttons, and these have a contact on the bottom, which then pushes down on these, and that shorts it, does effectively the same job. What's interesting is that this circuit board is actually screwed onto the top, much like the CX10. Now this basic technology is what I am expecting to find inside the CX40 Plus, but we will see. So this brings us to the main event, which is the new CX40 Plus. On the bottom, you will not see any screw holes. I'm expecting that they're probably under these rubber feet, which are going to be adhered. So give me a second while I remove those. And as expected, the screws are under the feet. Not something I'm particularly happy about, but it is what it is. Let me just remove these 4 screws and I'll get back. Okay, I've removed those screws, so we're going to pop the top off and see what's inside. Interestingly, the connector for the cable is a much more modern connector. That's kind of cool. They tell you what the pinout is of the controller. That's nice. So let me disconnect this. Give me a second. Okay, I've gotten that removed. Much like the CX10 and the Flashback Controller, the PCB is mounted to the top plate. So I'm going to need a smaller screwdriver to remove these. Keep track of those. Oh, do not want to lose that. And we'll see what is underneath of this. And yeah, as you can see, it is using the same technology that the Flashback controller used, which is about what I expected. It's a modern technology. Most modern devices use that, so it makes sense. Underneath of here, okay. So instead of flat like the Flashback, it actually looks a little bit more like the original under there. But yeah, that's how this system works. It's pretty much what I expected. Well, these aren't very tactile when I push down on them from above. Anyway, that answers that question. So next we will move on to the paddle controllers. Okay, so next we're going to tear down the paddles. On the right is the original paddle. On the left is the 2600 plus paddle. First, generally that was violent, but you pull that off. So let's see if that works the same. I'm not convinced it does work the same. Okay, that's interesting. Next we're going to unscrew the back. And inside the original, you can see the back case doesn't do much. We just have a potentiometer and a pretty generic switch here. And that's more or less what I'm expecting to see inside of here. So let's give it a go. See? Yep, the back is a separate piece, and indeed, oh, that's interesting. So this part actually looks very similar. Up top, the button, it really is just a big old button. This one even looks a little bit older because it's got a non-integrated spring, but look at the potentiometer. That is way different. It still works functionally the same, but yeah, that was unexpected, but pretty cool. So that's what's inside the paddle controller as well. Okay, so the next thing I want to check out is intercompatibility between the system and the original system from a hardware perspective. So here I have the cartridge that came with the paddle controller for the 2600 Plus. And here I have a real original cartridge. And as you can see, this is right here. So, as we would expect, this slots in there just fine. Get better, it came with it. This is an original cartridge, and we can see it also slots in here just fine. Again, no dust cover on this one, but not a big deal. So next, I'm going to bring in my 4-switch model. We'll use the same 2 cartridges. This is the original one. It plugs in here just fine. However, what I've noticed is that if I try to plug this in, Oh, it plugs in now. Interesting. Let me check this one. Earlier when I was trying these, it was not actually plugging into there. So that's interesting, but good. Let me just check the 6 switch that I have here real quick. This should be the same as the heavy 6er, so I'm not going to bring that out. We'll try this again. And yeah, that actually is not slotting in here. That's good. So this is behaving like it was in the 4 switch earlier. Oh, and now it slots in. So it's definitely a bit finicky getting these new cartridges in the old systems, but they do fit. I'm almost wondering if like these pins are just, you can notice that these pins are not as wide as they are on the old one. And I don't think they're sticking up as far. So I suspect that has something to do with it. Okay, so the cartridges are mostly intercompatible. Okay, now if we come around back, here is the CX40 Plus, and here is the original CX40. You can see that this is a thing I didn't cover earlier. They did a pretty good job recreating this connector. The Atari logo is only on one side on the CX40 Plus, but other than that, pretty close. You might also notice that the original connector is more square and the new one's more round. As far as plugging them in, the one that came with it plugs in, so that's good. And an older one plugs in just fine, although it feels a little bit loose. That might be a little bit of foreshadowing. Let me go bring in my 4-switch model. CX40 plugs in, feels fine. CX40 Plus plugs in, but it's very tight. So that's a little bit concerning. You can see how much force I needed to remove that. Now let's bring in the 6 switch. So CX40 plugs in. It's a little bit tight, not bad. CX40 Plus, I cannot plug into the 6 switch properly. Maybe if I really force it. But I am worried if I do that enough times, I'm going to damage this system. And it really does not want to come out. This one's a little stiff too, to be fair. So technically the controllers are intercompatible from that perspective, but I don't necessarily recommend it because you could cause damage. And I believe it's the same deal with the paddles. So let's go. I'm making a huge mess here. Let me go put the controllers away, the joysticks away specifically. So here's the old one, and it plugs in. Actually feels pretty decent. New one plugs in, actually feels a bit tight. So if that feels tight in this system, that's concerning. Let's bring out the 4 switch. Which one is the old one? This is the old one. Plugs in fine. New one. Plugs in if you really force it. So not great. Go to the 6 switch. Old one. Plugs in fine. New one. Again, you really have to force it. So yeah, again, like the joysticks, I don't recommend using the new paddles on an old system, which is really a shame because they're well built. And I guess that will bring me to the wrap up. From a hardware perspective, I think this thing is awesome. I think it's very well built, and I think they've struck the perfect balance between modernizing it and being faithful to the original system. I also quite like the peripherals for the most part. I don't like that the screws are hidden on the joystick. I think that's not cool, but you probably aren't going to need to service it as often as the original joystick because honestly, it's better designed and built. The paddles, depending on what potentiometer they're using, might be more reliable as well, but are otherwise identical pretty much. I wish the connectors on the ends were a little bit more original-ish so that I didn't feel sketched out plugging them into new one. But besides those nitpicks, I mean, there's not much I can complain about. The way they've done the LED, I don't think is bad, but it's definitely weird. But it would also let you swap it in for a different color. For example, if you want the Atari logo to glow red, it'd be really easy to do. So while right now I cannot recommend the system due to the fact that mine does not work and the fact that others online have reported the same issue as me, I'm hoping Atari fixes that. I do wish I could recommend the newer peripherals to existing Atari owners, but with the connection at the end, I wouldn't risk it. But I think that's something Atari could tweak and make work well. Same goes for the cartridges. It's not really a big deal since you're probably not going to be using these in an older system, but it would be nice if they worked well. I think if they tweak the cartridge design as well, this would be extremely solid from a hardware perspective. So yeah, overall, I really like it. Hopefully I can post a video in the future showing the system actually running and be able to properly recommend it. But until then, thanks for watching. I hope this was interesting.